Hey guys, welcome back to Release the Craftin. Priscilla here with another episode of Storycraft. Storycraft is the segment where I do a craft and tell you a story, and right now we're wrapping up the unintentionally themed month of Vasilisa and Baba Yaga stories, and I have a final, but not absolutely final. There's more stories I could possibly tell, but I want to end the month. I want to end it. Just the month, not everything else. That's so dark. I want to end the month with a Baba Yaga story and wrap this up nicely with a little bow, and then give you guys some Baba Yaga facts if I have time at the end. It depends on how much I talk, and already we're not off to a great start. If there's a story that you would like to hear on Storycraft, let me know in the comments below, because I am always taking requests, and I am currently actively taking requests. So if there's something you want to hear, speak now or forever hold your peace. I don't know what to tell you. Also, if you haven't already, check out my Patreon. I have a bunch of different tiers with a bunch of different offerings. Most recently, I started a podcast on there, so if you would like to hear podcasty things where I talk about stuff, if you like this, you might like that, it's up there. It's at the $5 tier on my Patreon, and that's all the shameless self-promotion. Let's get into the story. So today, if you've read the title or anything like that, you've probably already guessed. We're talking about Baba Yaga, the girl, and the hedgehog. And, you guys, this story is really cute. But also, I wanted to tell this one in particular because it alludes to a story that I have been wanting to tell for a very long time. So I figured if I planted the seed now, I would then be compelled to tell it possibly next week. So we'll see how things happen. I'm pretty mercurial, so anything could happen. It could change. But, you know, I'm sowing the seeds for this future story that's going to come back into play because it has elements of that tale. And you guys have already pointed out already that some of the other, like, stories about Vasilisa have ties to other stories that you're also, like, picking up the details of. And we've talked about that a little bit before. So, like, you can see how the stories in this particular region have sort of become, like, a good comparison for stories in other regions and other countries and stuff like that. It's just been really interesting. So I wanted to do this one because of that connection. So here we go. Our tale starts in the way long ago with a little girl named Marussia. And she was a good little girl, you guys. She really was. She was really dutiful, and her family, like, they were doing okay. They weren't wealthy by any means, but they weren't, like, struggling or suffering. Everyone treated each other well. They loved each other. They were very happy. And she was such a good little girl that her parents trusted her, like, basically implicitly, and they would often send her to the market to go pick up food and stuff that they needed for dinner and things like that. So they sent her one day, her parents did, to go get turnips from the market. And on the way, she has to pass through the forest to get to the town so she can get to the market. And as she's passing through the forest, she sees in front of her, on the path, a giant house on a pair of giant chicken legs. And you guys, she's so startled that what she doesn't realize is the money she had in her pocket falls out as she, like, takes a couple steps back in shock and alarm. And as she is a little bit shooketh by this house on chicken legs, she remembers what she's supposed to say so that she can pass by safely, hopefully. So she says, "Hut, hut, turn your back from the forest and your front to me." And the hut does. It turns all the way around, and the front door is now facing her, and it settles down, and she's like, okay, whew, all right, I'm just gonna squeeze by you here and be on my way. But it turns out that doesn't happen because the door opens wide. And who walks out but the main event herself, Baba Yaga. Now, Baba Yaga is a tall, but also very, very thin, old woman with iron teeth. Sources sort of vary on how Baba Yaga looks, but they all agree that she has a bone leg, which might be a bony leg or just a leg made of bone. So I'm inferring from that she is very thin and possibly has a skeletal leg. But she strolls out of her house, and she goes right up to Marussia, and she says, "I love to eat bad little Russian girls." And Marussia goes, "Oh, no, no, no. No, grandmother, I am a good girl. I am not a bad girl at all." And Baba Yaga picks her up and puts her into the soup pot. and starts to sprinkle salt and pepper on her. And she says, "No, grandmother, I promise I am a good girl." And Baba Yaga looks at her, and she looks her up and down. And with a little look of disgust, she goes, "Well, I can't eat a good girl for dinner." She's like, "But I can make you cook my dinner." And this is, that's rational. That's totally normal. That makes sense. So she pulls Marussia out of the pot, and she tells her to get to work making her dinner, because now she's disappointed. She won't get to have any children for dinner. You guys, words are really hard. So, Marussia, because she is a good little Russian girl, sets about immediately making a soup for Baba Yaga to eat. And while she's at it, she tidies up around inside of the chicken hut. So she's very well behaved. And as time goes on, the hut moves on, and Marussia is now stuck inside of this house, because every time she would serve Baba Yaga something to eat, Baba Yaga would eat everything, give her a little morsel of food, and then fall asleep immediately. And she would try to get out the door, but the door was locked. The windows wouldn't open. She couldn't escape the hut. So the hut every day would get up and move, and every day Marussia would have to cook for Baba Yaga, and the same thing would happen. Baba Yaga would eat almost everything that she made, give her a tiny little morsel to go by, and then fall fast asleep, and Marussia would be trapped inside. But while they were together, Baba Yaga would tell her things, sort of secret, mystical ways of the women, witchy women particularly, things, right? So she was passing on some knowledge to Marussia about herbs and foods and plants and all the things around. And one day she tells her that she's going to go out. And so she gets in her motor and she grabs her pestle to begin to fly away, and Marussia asks her where she's going, and she says, "Well, you see, I need to find this special flower that I in particular need to survive another 200 years. Without this flower, I won't make it. As you can see, I'm a very old woman, so I need this." And Marussia has to continue to stay in the house. She can't leave when Baba Yaga's gone, because the house is keeping her inside. So she just continues to cook and clean very dutifully, while, absorbing the knowledge that she has been learning this entire time from Baba Yaga. So one morning, Marussia's like, "Okay, I gotta get out of here. I gotta figure this out." She starts patting down her pockets, realizes she doesn't have the money that she was supposed to have for the market. She doesn't really have anything. She's just a little girl. And she tells Baba Yaga, as Baba Yaga is getting ready to go, she says, "Baba Yaga, could I please have some turnips? Because as you can see, my mom actually sent me to go get turnips, and if I could just have those turnips, I could bring them home to her and continue to be a good little girl." And Baba Yaga eyes her kind of warily, and she goes, "Well, I suppose I could get you some turnips." And Marussia says, "But see, here's the problem. The problem is that I lost the money that my mom gave me to get the turnips in the first place." And Baba Yaga goes, "Ha! You lost the money? Then you are indeed a bad little Russian girl." So Baba Yaga picks her up again, tosses her into the pot, throws a bunch of salt and pepper on her, and then decides that she does, in fact, want to add a little bit more to the soup. She wants a little bit more than just little girl in her soup. So she goes outside and she starts to scrounge for some mushrooms and some leafy greens that she can add to her soup. Give it some flavor, a little extra something. And while she's out there, she runs across a hedgehog, and Baba Yaga looks at this hedgehog and she says, "You know what? I think this is exactly the flavor my soup needs." So she scoops up the hedgehog too and goes back inside, where Marussia, who is a good little girl, is still sitting inside of the soup pot. And so she Baba Yaga tosses in the mushrooms, the greens, and the hedgehog. And then she goes, "You know what else this needs? A little bit of rosemary." So she heads back outside. And while Baba Yaga is outside, Marussia looks at the hedgehog looks at her, and then the hedgehog opens its mouth and speaks. Because this hedgehog, you guys, is actually the son of the Tsar and the Tsarina. And it turns out this hedgehog is also an overshare, because this hedgehog shares his entire life story with Marussia while they're just chilling in the soup pot waiting to be eaten. So he tells Marussia that he's the son of the Tsar and the Tsarina. What happened was the Tsar and the Tsarina could not have any children, and it made them super depressed. So one day in the garden, the Tsarina comes across a really special flower, and she sees this flower and she decides to make a wish on this flower that if she could just have a child, she wouldn't care if it was a giant or as small as a hedgehog. And that's when suddenly the talking little hedgehog boy appeared. So the royal couple were like super excited. They were super happy. They could not be more like grateful for this like little baby hedgehog blessing that they had been praying for, because they wanted a child so desperately. But it turns out even kings and queens are not exempt from bullying, because the court made fun of them for having a hedgehog son. They didn't understand the concept of having fur babies. At that time, they weren't, they weren't people like me. So, yeah, they just weren't sensitive to the fact that this couple had been longing for a child and had decided to adopt a hedgehog, a magical talking hedgehog, into their family. So eventually the royal couple was like, okay, yeah, this is embarrassing. We're the Tsar and Tsarina. Like, we can't keep doing this. So they put their little baby hedgehog bundle of joy onto a rooster and just sent him in the woods to go live on his own. So Marussia is listening to this entire life story, and she's like, that's really interesting. This special flower, what did it look like in particular? And the hedgehog tells her that it was a black sunflower, and that is in fact the same exact flower that Baba Yaga is looking for. So when Baba Yaga comes back inside, rosemary in hand, ready to season up her tasty soup, Marussia says, Baba Yaga, grandmother, if you want, I could tell you where your sunflower is if you could give me the turnips and let us go. And Baba Yaga looks at her again, up and down, and says, yeah, that seems like a fair deal. I could do that. So, Marussia picks up the hedgehog and she says, Hedgehog, show us where to find the flower. And they get into Baba Yaga's mortar and pestle, and they fly all the way, all over the forest, all over the mountains, all the way back until they get to the palace of the Tsar and Tsarina. They get into the palace gardens, and Baba Yaga doesn't even wait for the pestle to the mortar to slow down before leaping out, because she sees her black sunflower. She snatches it up, and as soon as she plucks it, the little hedgehog turns into a little boy, like a real life human little boy, which is amazing that nobody ever thought to maybe try picking the flower. But yeah, he turns into a little boy whose name happens to be Dimitri. So Baba Yaga was super excited about her flower. Marussia reminded her that she also needed turnips. So together, Baba Yaga, Marussia, and Dimitri all fly back to Baba Yaga's house. Baba Yaga gives her some turnips, sends them both on her way because she don't give a fuck about these kids anymore. And they both go hand in hand back to Marussia's house, where they live happily ever after. So not only did Marussia disappear for like a week or two at a time, she also got the turnips she was supposed to get. She did get them. And she came back with a little brother. Happily ever after, the end. I'm sure her parents had no questions whatsoever for everything that happened. They were just like, the Baba Yaga got our child, and that's it. No more questions, no more stories. That's the end. And then they were just excited to see that they also got a son when their daughter came home. So yeah, that is the end of the story. It's really cute. It's a really short little story, but I wanted to share this because, like I said, there's a story I want to tell you guys, and I think I've even mentioned it maybe at one point, but I don't want to spoil it if I haven't. And it has echoes of this story in there, so I was like, perfect. The other thing, I wanted to tell you guys this story because it's adorable, but also, it's a really good illustration of the fact that, despite the many, many tales of Baba Yaga in folklore, being a monstrous old hag who eats women or people, who's a cannibal, like that kind of thing, she never actually kills anybody in the stories. She might not help somebody, but she never actually kills anybody. Even though she makes a lot of death threats. She doesn't kill anybody in folklore. Now, not to say, like, in modern renditions of her, they definitely make her kill everybody and everything. But, like, in the old days, she never did. She just begrudgingly helped people or sent them away and was like, get out of my sight. I'm sick of ya. And that's a real one. On top of that, I know we talked about this a little bit at the beginning of this whole run of series, but Baba is like a word for grandmother. It's widely accepted to be a word for grandmother. It's also like a pejorative term for women. So, like, take that with a grain of salt, but most people recognize it as a word for grandmother. The Yaga part, though, nobody can really agree on what it means because they can't really decide where it came from. So there's lots of things that say it could be like a serpent, a whore, a witch. It could just be another word for anger or pain. So there's lots of like synonyms, I guess, for what the word Yaga could possibly mean. Technically, like loose synonyms. So nobody can really agree on that, but they all just agree that it's basically Grandmother Witch is her name. And then she didn't actually appear in like written folklore until about the 1800s. She was written in 1755 in a book that compared the Slavic gods to the Roman deities, but she had no like parallel comparison. So she was just in a list. And they were comparing all the Slavic deities to other Roman deities, and then they were like, except for Baba Yaga, she's here, she's definitely here, but she's not actually comparable by any standard, which is very fair for her, although I would argue that, like, Hecate would make a really good comparison for her, minus the cannibalism. The other thing that I think is interesting is that in folklore, she's seen as, like, a sort of witch, a mortal witch character, but there's a lot of evidence to dictate that she used to be revered as a goddess, and in some places still is treated as a goddess and not just a witchy woman in the woods. And there's even some evidence and some folklore stories that represent the Baba Yaga as not just one person, but 3 sister witches who all live in their own huts and do their own interesting, unique things. And that theme of 3 witches shows up in, like 3 grandmotherly type witches, shows up in folklore a lot as well. So there's something there with that too, a connection to Baba Yaga that isn't really explored. And I do have like a story on my docket of stories I want to tell you guys that has like the 3 witches in the woods that have to be met, and it's a very popular theme, especially in this region, to have the hero go and encounter 3 different witches to receive help or ask a question or advice or things like that. So it's really common, and it's really interesting that there's a connection there with Baba Yaga. I didn't know that initially when I started doing this, the research for this, but it was just something very interesting. Also, almost all the stories I can see indicate that something has to be said to get the hut to turn around, and it is usually turn your back to the forest and your front to me. Sometimes there's like a key word in front of it that's Russian. I don't speak Russian. I don't want to butcher anything. I already feel like I butchered Marujia's name like a lot, so I don't want to butcher that. But other than that, it's widely believed that if Baba Yaga is a goddess, she is the goddess of time, of death, of like magic and sorcery, basically the death and rebirth cycles, as well as like the seasons and the forest. There's even evidence that she is a goddess of time in the story that I told you guys about Vasilisa the Wise. When she encounters those 3 different horsemen in the woods, and in some stories, those 3 horsemen are her sons, or Baba Yaga's sons, and they represent the morning, the noon, and then the evening. Wow, that is so hard for me to get out right now. Clearly, I'm struggling. I'm hungry. So I'm going to jump off here and go eat something to, like, refuel my brain because it's slowly leaking from my ears. But that's going to be it for me for now in regards to Baba Yaga. I appreciate your faces if you guys made it to the end of the video. And like I said, you can always request whatever you'd like to hear in the comments below. And if you don't want people to know you requested it for some reason, you can also message me. That's also an option. But I'm going to get out of here, you guys. I will catch you guys all in the next one. Until next time, guys, happy crafting. Also, go check out Shabby Creep if you haven't seen that. If you're watching this from the far future, it's on my playlist, Shabby Creep 24. But if you're watching it currently as this episode goes up, it's almost over. And there's been, like, crazy, amazing things. Catch up. There's a playlist. All the things on my channel. You know where to look for stuff. I'm not going to tell you where to look for it. Until then, guys. Bye!